Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healthy at Work. My name is Catherine Wilcox, a workplace health specialist with a big passion for helping people thrive at work. From the home office to the corporate office, from the assembly line to the front line, I've got you covered here for your healthiest life at work. Now let's dive into today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Healthy at Work. Today's question, should I stay or should I go? Are you thinking about quitting your job? Um, Many people do, especially when their work is having an impact on their mental health. Now, what's interesting in the times that we find ourselves in is that, it can be tough out there. It's a tough labor market right now. People may be inclined to hang on to their employment, even if it's harming their mental health. So, what are some of the questions that you should ask yourself if you are contemplating leaving your role? What are some of the things you should take into consideration before you make a final decision? That's what we're going to be exploring here today. So hang tight with me. I'm going to guide you through some important questions to ask. And at the end of the segment, I'll share a practice with you that can provide some insight as to what type of decision you might want to make around staying or quitting. Okay, let's get into it here. The first thing we might want to take a look at if we're considering leaving our job is whether it is negatively impacting our mental health. So, how would we know that? So, this is where we might want to look at things like sleep. Is your job keeping you up at night? And I would say, is there a pattern to this? Many of us have situations, episodes, seasons of work that, might impact things like our sleep. But if it's a feature or has become a feature, a regular feature of our life that, we're having a lot of sleepless nights, we're up with worry about work, that is important information to take note of. It also impacts to things like our mood. Some of us might be really tuned into this if we, have developed skills around mindfulness or attunement to ourselves. Some of us don't have those skills, right? We're quite disconnected from our body and our experience, so we might not know that. Another way we can get intel around that is to notice if the people we're in proximity to, the people we love, our partners, our spouses, our friends, our family, our community, are sharing concerns about how work might be impacting us. That's another way we might get some of that information. What's going on in your physical well-being? Have you noticed things like increased susceptibility to viruses? Are you having challenges with your immunity? Are you having other health issues act up? This can all give us information around the amount of stress we might be under and, what our body and what our emotions might be trying to tell us around the way that work is impacting us. Now, some of these stressors around work might be temporary. I just want to acknowledge that. And so that's worth investigating. Again, is this a season of challenge in your workplace? Is this related to a project, for example? Something that's time limited or a change process that you're in? Or are you beginning to notice, and depending on how long you've been, in your role, you might notice things like a culture of chronic stress. You might notice that your mental health is impacted in a longer term way. So not just episodically in response, just something that happens, an event. So take evaluation of that, notice what's going on mentally, physically, spiritually in your relationships that might be giving you information around whether your work is actually draining you or energizing you. So first thing to take into consideration, how has my mental health been impacted over a period of time? And again, we're looking at to try to differentiate between stressors that are temporary and longer term indicators that you might be working in a culture that is psychologically hazardous. Okay, the next thing we really want to consider is, have I tried to influence change? So before you quit, it can be helpful to ask yourself, and have I tried anything to address these issues? What have I done? Do I feel safe to try to address these issues? If you do not, that might be uh, the sign of a more persistent problem with your work culture. For example, if it's not safe to speak up about what's happening, it's not safe to report any challenges that are impacting your mental health. So again, what is it that we might want to think about doing? What are some of the ways we can try to influence change? Um, we can provide feedback to the organization, keeping in mind our level of safety in doing so. I just want to acknowledge some of us might not feel safe to speak up. Um, what is the relationship that you have with your leader? Again, safety is a consideration there. Some of us might feel very comfortable and supported and safe with our leaders. Some of us might not feel that. So, could I have a conversation with my leader? Is there a way I could try to address some of these issues, ask for change? Have I explored options for adjustments? If that's not possible within my own work area, have I considered other roles in the organization, transferring to other departments? Is there a way to redesign my role so that it better meets my needs or better supports my mental health? These are all things that you might want to investigate first. Sometimes internal mobility is easier than starting over somewhere new. Maybe there are also aspects of your work that you really love and enjoy, so that's worth taking into consideration too. So, what have I tried? Is there a way that I have taken action to try to address the things that are concerning to me? And I think it's also worth investigating what is the quality of the action that I've taken. Sometimes people will say to me, "Well, Catherine, I tried to address it and nothing happened." And so sometimes in my work with individuals, I'll kind of break down, well, how did you go about doing that? Who did you talk to? How did you communicate your concerns? Did you follow up around them? And again, we always take safety into account as we're exploring what people have done or how they've tried to address their concerns, because it's not all on us, right? We do have responsibilities to bring forward concerns, but our workplaces also have responsibilities to listen and act too. So let's move to this next question. Another consideration we would want to look at before quitting a job is, what is your plan if you leave? Sometimes when we're really impacted, when we're really stressed, we might also be very frustrated and overwhelmed and angry, even at our employer in our work environment. So it's okay to have all of those feelings and experiences, and still really helpful if we're really activated and angry and overwhelmed and just feel like we want to, quit on the spot or quit immediately, to, if we can, take a pause and, explore some of the practical considerations first, right? To really think things through. So, can you afford to leave now? It's a very practical consideration, but again, in these financial times, something worth considering. So maybe you have savings, maybe you have a buffer or an emergency fund, and I encourage us all, if possible, to take that into consideration in our financial planning. Can we save, some of our funds in the event that we're in a position like this, right, where we really want to leave a job, but we feel very trapped financially. And that is the reality for many, 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 many people. And I have been there myself as well. So, no judgment there. Also, if we don't have these funds, I know we're in a very difficult financial time. Generally, right now, it could be hard, but really important goal, right? To support us if we're able to, no matter what amount we were able to put away. So, do you have that buffer? Could you build that buffer? Could you build that buffer before resigning? That's another thing to consider. Could you secure another job before resigning? That's also something to kind of think about. Could you create some kind of exit strategy and plan and have that mapped out so that you are in a better position? For example, if you are leaving, knowing that you have some security that you're going to. So something else to take into consideration. Do you need a bit of time? This is something to think about as we think about leaving and what our plan is. Would it benefit you to take a bit of time, even if that means, taking a leave, if that's available to you in your employment situation, to get some clarity, right? Um, could you take some time to really reflect on what's needed, what your plan will be to get things in order? Could you benefit from that? Do you need some time also away from the work environment in order to make the significant decisions? Sometimes it's really difficult to make this decision when you're in it, right? And living it every day and impacted by it every day. So, giving that some thought. And again, that can really depend on what the leave provisions are for you, what's accessible for you. Just a final point around this, that financial pressure can really amplify the distress we might be feeling around this decision. And so sometimes when we take a very practical and problem solving approach to planning an exit, it actually helps to reduce some of that distress. So sometimes even knowing that we have a plan or that we're working towards our plan or that we're developing our plan helps us feel safer because we can see the exit door, right? We might not be ready to walk through it right now, but we know that we're taking small actions each day to move us closer to that. So planning, do we have a plan? What's our exit plan? Something to really kind of keep in mind.
Hi, it's Catherine. I just wanted to pop on here for a second to let you know that I work with people individually who are seeking support around their workplace mental health. If you're feeling exhausted, burnt out, or worried about a workplace related issue, I would love to connect to learn more about your needs and explore whether working together could be a good fit. Visit my website, www.feedthelionwellness.com, for more details or to book a free 15-minute discovery call today.
The fourth question that we want to take into consideration is whether the stress we are experiencing is temporary or whether it is related to the culture of the place that we work. Whether, this is not just a difficult period, a difficult project, a difficult client, a difficult season of life I find myself in, but whether this is actually the culture of the place that I work. So this is where we might consider things like, what's going on in our own life. Are we returning to work after an injury or a leave? Are we going through a significant life transition outside of the workplace that is making it more difficult to be within the workplace? If that's the case, have we explored an accommodation, for example? Maybe perhaps you have just welcomed a new addition to your family. Maybe, you have a young child at home. Maybe you're not sleeping. Maybe you need a more flexible work arrangement. Is there something that you could ask for in terms of an accommodation that might support you to get through this difficult period or this difficult season of life? So, thinking about the long game here and, is this something that with the right support I could navigate, or is what I'm experiencing going to be pervasive because it's related to what I will be doing day after day after day. So some examples of that. Perhaps you work in a trauma exposed environment. Perhaps chronically you are exposed to, stories of suffering, people who are really struggling. Perhaps, critical incidents in the workplace or something that you experience on a daily basis. I worked in healthcare myself for many years, and this idea of a critical incident being something that, just happens once in a while, was not a reality in our environment. These disruptive, intense, impactful, traumatic events would be happening very regularly. So if that's the case, then, how am I going to cope or adjust to that in the long term? Or can I? Is that really going to work for me? Also, we want to think about work culture here. Is it that you notice people saying, doing? What are the behaviors that are permissible in your work environment? If you notice that, people's behavior, their language, their actions are impacting you, and there is not, leadership intervention, there's not a plan for change, that can tell you something about whether or not you're able to influence the culture you're in. And that could give you information about whether or not staying is in your best interests. And finally, the last thing, we really want to ask ourselves before quitting a job is thinking about what's actually keeping us in the role. So sometimes it is the stability, right, of knowing where we're going to be each day, the structure, the routine of that. Sometimes we are staying because we are afraid of change. We might feel really anxious about having to start over again with new people in a new role. Um, it's that idea of, what it is that we know, what's familiar to us, even if it might be hurtful and harming us, can somehow, to our subconscious minds, feel safer than what is unknown and what is uncertain. Um, do we have a sense of loyalty to our employer that, again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be loyal and committed and really passionate about where we work. But if, our loyalty actually begins to uh, erode us thinking about what's in our own best interests, we might want to take a look at that. Um, is there a reciprocity in your relationship with your employer, or are we being sort of loyal at all costs? Um, Sometimes we also stay because we really hope it's going to get better, right? Or we hope that we can change the environment. Maybe somebody will leave, if some of our challenges are related to our relationships at work, not going well. Will the person leave eventually? Um, will we get more budget? Will we get more resourcing? Will something change and shift? These are all things that we might be thinking about, and I think when we investigate and really ask ourselves that question, why do I work here really and truly? Like, what's keeping me here? We can get clearer about whether we're making a choice consciously or unconsciously. And really, when it comes to the conscious and subconscious mind, we know that the subconscious actually really runs the show. What is the subconscious mind? Well, it's, formed through our early conditioning, early learning. We're not really aware many times what is driving our decisions. That's based on our familiarity zone within ourselves. We can become really accustomed to making choices in our life, not based out of what would truly be in our best interest, but what is the most, comfortable to us. So if we subconsciously, outside of our awareness, are comfortable operating in chaos, if we're comfortable with people being unkind, to us, if we're comfortable with people being unappreciative, if that's just, again, what we've come to accept and know and familiarize ourselves with, we might be continuing to choose that over a work environment or an employment situation that would be better for us, because it's easier, again, to go back to what is known and familiar and therefore safe for us, as opposed to venturing into, new territory, which can feel really unsafe and unfamiliar. So I wanted to bring us to this last piece here, which is around, how can I make this decision? I encourage you to take all of the reflection and information that you've gathered from those previous 5 questions and then think about, what is it that I am willing to accept? Um, can I truly accept working where I am? Just imagining that nothing would change. So we want to kind of take out of it this idea of it might change, it might get better. And I encourage you to think about if nothing changed, if the next 6 to 12 months continued to yield the same experience that you have today, would you be able to accept that? And that's essentially, the choice that we have available to us is, can I accept the conditions that I'm working in? If I can't accept them, can I do something to try to change them? So, where is my sphere of influence and control there? And if I can't, am I willing to accept the risk of leaving? And can I manage those risks? For example, with something like a good exit plan. Now, I hope that whatever decision you land on, if you're someone out there watching or listening, that, it really is in your best interests. These are very personal decisions. So I often share with my clients, I can't tell you what the right answer is. I can't tell you what to do. But something I also encourage us to think about as we wrap up this episode today is, we make a decision, we make many decisions in life, and some of them don't work out. Maybe we choose something and it's not as expected, or we regret a decision that we make. However, we can always learn. We can always learn from whatever choice we make and whatever is available to us in the moment. What often happens is we get stuck, right? We're afraid to make the wrong choice, so we make no choice. But making no choice is still a choice. So I wish you all the best if you're somebody that's contemplating your own decision making around this. And I hope you'll join me next time for more conversations around workplace health here at Healthy at Work. Be well, everyone. Take care of yourself and each other, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not medical advice or mental health treatment. If you're struggling at work, please reach out to the supports within your workplace or community. This podcast was gratefully recorded on the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations.